Leonard Hutchins stood in the pre-dawn cold of his Iowa barn, his weathered hands resting on the stall door, watching the calf that his entire family believed was proof he'd finally lost his mind. At 73 years old, after 55 years of cattle farming, Leonard's children and grandchildren had been questioning his judgment more frequently. His age, they said gently but firmly, was catching up with him. His decisions weren't as sharp, his instincts weren't as reliable. And this calf, this scraggly, undersized, completely unremarkable Red Angus bull calf, was, according to his family, the final evidence that Leonard Hutchins needed to retire and let the younger generation take over the farm. The calf in question stood in the corner of his stall, small for his 5 months of age, his red coat dull and unimpressive, his frame showing none of the robust development that buyers looked for in breeding stock. He'd been born last April to one of Leonard's commercial cows, an unplanned pregnancy, an unregistered dam, no papers, no pedigree, no documented value whatsoever. By all conventional measures, this calf should have been sold at weaning for whatever the commodity market would pay, probably $400 to $600 for an animal of his size and lack of documentation. Instead, Leonard had refused to sell him, had moved him to a private stall, had been feeding him a special high-protein diet that cost $85 per bag, had been spending extra time with him daily, studying him with an intensity that worried his children. "Dad, we need to talk." His son Marcus had appeared in the barn doorway, his expression carrying that particular mixture of concern and frustration that had become increasingly common in family conversations. Marcus was 48, capable, practical, and increasingly convinced that his father's attachment to this worthless calf was a sign of declining mental acuity. "About the calf," Leonard said, not turning around. It wasn't a question. "Yes, about the calf. Dad, you've spent over $100 and $200 on feed and supplements for an animal worth maybe $500 at sale. That's not good business. That's not even rational. He's worth more than $500. Marcus sighed, the sound carrying years of similar conversations. "Dad, I've had 3 different cattle buyers look at him. They all said the same thing: small frame, poor development, no papers, commercial stock at best. One of them offered $450 out of pity. You refused. They're wrong." "Dad?" Marcus stepped into the barn, his voice softening. "I know it's hard to let go of control. You've run this farm your entire adult life. But Jennifer and we're worried. Mom's worried. This obsession with a calf that has no objective value, the money you're spending, the way you talk about him like he's something special when every expert who's seen him says he's not." "I don't need experts to tell me what I can see with my own eyes," Leonard interrupted, his voice carrying an edge of steel that made Marcus stop mid-sentence. "I've been raising cattle since before you were born. I know what I'm looking at." "Then explain it to me. What exactly do you see that 3 professional cattle buyers and 2 veterinarians have missed?" Leonard finally turned to face his son, and Marcus was struck by how lucid and determined his father's eyes were. Not the confusion of age, but the absolute certainty of someone who knew something the rest of the world didn't. "His bone structure," Leonard said quietly. "The way his shoulder blade angles, the specific placement of his hip joints, the shape of his head, the width between his eyes, the particular way his hooves are formed. Marcus, I've seen these exact characteristics before, 40 years ago, in a bull that changed this farm's entire trajectory." Marcus tried to keep the skepticism from his face and failed. "Dad, you're seeing patterns that aren't there. You're remembering something from decades ago and projecting it onto a calf that doesn't actually—" "Red Baron," Leonard said, cutting him off. "1983. Your grandfather and I bought him from a dispersal sale for $800. Everyone said we were fools. He was small, poorly developed, no papers. But I saw something in his conformation. Paid for genetic testing out of my own pocket, which your grandfather thought was a waste of money." Marcus knew this story. It was family legend. Red Baron had turned out to carry exceptional genetics, had produced offspring that sold for premium prices, had essentially funded Marcus's college education and his sister Jennifer's wedding. "That was a 1 in a million occurrence," Marcus said. "Lightning doesn't strike twice." "It does if you know how to recognize the storm," Leonard replied. This calf has Red Baron's bloodline characteristics. I'm certain of it. Dad, that's impossible. Red Baron died in 1994. We haven't had his genetics in our herd for 30 years. Recessive genes can hide for generations, Leonard said stubbornly. I'm telling you, this calf is expressing Red Baron's exceptional conformation. And if I'm right, he's not worth $500. He's worth $10,000 or more as breeding stock, possibly significantly more if his genetics test as I believe they will. Marcus felt a familiar mixture of love and exasperation. His father had been a brilliant cattleman in his prime, but this felt like desperation, like an aging man clinging to past glory and seeing miracles where none existed. Dad, I'm calling Dr. Paulson to come examine him. Professional opinion. If she says he's just a commercial calf with no special value, will you agree to sell him and let us move forward with Jennifer and me taking over more of the decision-making? Leonard's jaw tightened, but he nodded slowly. And if Dr. Paulson confirms what I see, if testing proves I'm right, then I'll apologize for doubting you, Marcus said, though his tone made clear he considered this outcome unlikely. Fair enough. Call her. As Marcus pulled out his phone, Leonard turned back to the calf, who had approached the stall door and was looking at him with large, intelligent eyes. Leonard reached out and scratched behind the calf's ears, his voice dropping to a whisper that Marcus couldn't hear. They think I'm crazy, little one. They think this old man is seeing things that aren't there. But I know what you are. I've spent 55 years learning to recognize excellence hidden under unpromising surfaces. And you, my friend, are excellence. The calf nuzzled Leonard's weathered hand, and somewhere deep in the old farmer's chest, certainty burned like an unshakable flame. He'd been right about Red Baron when everyone doubted him. He'd been right about dozens of smaller decisions over decades of farming, and he was right about this calf, even if he had to prove it to his entire skeptical family, even if it cost him every remaining dollar he'd saved, even if they thought he was losing his mind in the process. Dr. Paulson would examine the calf. Tests would be run. And Leonard Hutchins would finally, definitively, prove that sometimes experience and instinct see truths that conventional wisdom misses entirely. He just had to hold firm until that moment arrived. Dr. Paulson arrived 3 days later, driving up the long gravel driveway to the Hutchins farm on a gray November morning. At 42 years old, Dr. Samantha Paulson had been the primary large animal veterinarian for this region of Iowa for 15 years, and she knew the Hutchins family well. She'd delivered calves, treated infections, performed routine health checks, and watched as Leonard's age had gradually shifted farm management responsibilities to Marcus and Jennifer. She'd also witnessed the growing family concern about Leonard's recent behavior, the calf he insisted was special, the money he was spending, the stubborn conviction that bordered on obsession. Marcus had been frank on the phone. We need a professional opinion to either validate Dad's instinct or prove he's wrong so we can move forward. Leonard met her at the barn, his posture defensive despite his polite greeting. Samantha, thank you for coming. Leonard, she offered a warm but professional smile. Marcus says you've got a calf you want me to evaluate. I've got a calf everyone thinks is worthless. I believe he's exceptional. I need you to tell me if I'm seeing something real or if I'm just a stubborn old man refusing to admit his judgment's failing. The vulnerability in that statement made Dr. Paulson's chest tighten. She'd known Leonard since she'd started her practice fresh out of veterinary school. He'd been one of her first clients, had trusted her inexperience when others hadn't, had taught her practical knowledge that textbooks couldn't provide. Seeing him doubt himself now was painful. Let's look at him, she said gently. The calf stood in his stall, and Dr. Paulson's first impression aligned with everything Marcus had described. Small for 5 months, maybe 380 pounds when he should be closer to 450, coat lacking the gloss of optimal nutrition despite Leonard's expensive feed regimen, overall appearance unimpressive by commercial standards. Talk me through what you see, Dr. Paulson said as she entered the stall, her hands beginning their systematic examination. Leonard's voice took on a different quality. Confident, detailed, the voice of someone who'd spent decades studying cattle conformation. Look at his shoulder blade angle. It's exactly 45 degrees from his spine. Textbook perfect. That's rare in commercial stock. Now look at the width between his eyes. That measurement correlates with cranial capacity and intelligence markers. His hip placement creates optimal weight distribution for muscle development. His hooves are perfectly formed. The angle of his pasterns is ideal for structural soundness as he matures. Dr. Paulson examined each point Leonard mentioned. She had to admit, the calf's underlying bone structure was indeed excellent, but bone structure alone didn't make an exceptional animal, and plenty of commercial cattle had decent conformation without commanding premium prices. His current condition doesn't reflect that structure, she observed. He's underweight, underdeveloped. If his genetics were truly exceptional, we'd see more expression of that quality even at 5 months. Because he's been fighting a subclinical selenium deficiency that's been suppressing his growth, Leonard said immediately. I've been supplementing for 3 weeks now. Watch. Leonard pulled out his phone, showing Dr. Paulson photos dated from August through the present. The progression was undeniable. The calf had been even smaller, more fragile looking in earlier photos. The recent images showed gradual but clear improvement. I recognized the symptoms in September, Leonard continued. Slight stiffness in his gait, slow growth despite adequate nutrition, dull coat, classic selenium deficiency but subtle. Started supplementation on my own before anyone else noticed. Dr. Paulson reviewed the photos again, her professional assessment shifting. If Leonard had correctly diagnosed and treated a subclinical deficiency that others had missed, that demonstrated the kind of observational skill that didn't diminish with age, it deepened with experience. I'll run a blood panel, she said. Check his selenium levels, thyroid function, overall health markers. But Leonard, even if his health is improving, that doesn't prove he has exceptional genetics. Structure and health don't guarantee value. Then test his genetics, Leonard said, his voice carrying absolute conviction. Full DNA panel. Compare against the national database. I believe he's expressing traits from Red Baron's bloodline, specifically from Red Baron's sire, a bull called Crimson Legacy whose genetics were legendary. Dr. Paulson knew that story too. Crimson Legacy had been one of the foundation bulls of Red Angus breeding in the 1970s and 80s, his genetics prized but also incredibly rare in modern herds because so many lines had been diluted or lost over generations. Leonard, the chances of Red Baron's genetics, much less his sire's genetics, expressing randomly in a commercial calf 40 years later, are astronomically small. Small isn't impossible, Leonard said quietly. And Samantha, I've spent 55 years learning to see what others miss. My eyes might be older, my hands might shake more, but my ability to recognize quality cattle hasn't diminished. It's been refined by 5 decades of observation. If anything, I see more clearly now than I did at 30. The conviction in his voice, backed by the specific technical observations he'd made, gave Dr. Paulson pause. She'd seen too many cases where experienced farmers' instincts had proven correct despite contradicting modern diagnostic tools. Instinct built on decades of pattern recognition was a form of expertise that deserved respect. I'll do the full workup, she agreed. Blood panel, genetic testing, complete structural evaluation. It'll take 2 weeks for the DNA results. But Leonard, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that this is just a nice calf with good bone structure, not the genetic miracle you're hoping for. And you need to prepare yourself, Leonard replied with a slight smile, for the possibility that a 73-year-old farmer knows exactly what he's looking at. The 2 weeks that followed were the longest of Leonard's life. His family's skepticism had hardened into something approaching pity, the kind reserved for aging relatives whose stubbornness had crossed into delusion. Jennifer, his daughter, had started making gentle suggestions about estate planning, about transitioning farm ownership completely to the next generation, about Leonard taking it easy in his final years. The unspoken message was clear. They believed the test results would prove him wrong, and when they did, it would be time for Leonard to step aside entirely. Marcus had stopped arguing altogether, which was somehow worse than the confrontations. He simply watched his father with sad, patient eyes, waiting for the inevitable moment when reality would force Leonard to admit his judgment had failed. The only one who seemed to maintain any faith was Leonard's wife, Dorothy, who'd stood beside him for 51 years of marriage. She brought him coffee in the barn where he spent hours with the calf, sat quietly while he talked through his observations, never once suggesting he was wrong, but never quite confirming she believed him either. "Whether you're right or wrong about this calf," she said one evening, "you're right about one thing. Your experience matters. Don't let them take that from you." Leonard continued his careful regimen with the calf: specialized feed, selenium supplementation, daily handling to build temperament and trust. With each passing day, the animal's condition improved noticeably. His coat developed a healthier sheen. His frame began filling out. His movements became more fluid and confident. But Leonard knew that improved health wasn't proof of exceptional genetics. His family could attribute the calf's progress to good care of an ordinary animal, not validation of hidden greatness. On the 13th day, Dr. Paulson called. Leonard answered on the first ring, his heart hammering. "Leonard, I have the results. Are Marcus and Jennifer there? You might want your family present for this." The careful neutrality in her voice gave nothing away. Leonard's hand trembled as he called his children to the kitchen, where they gathered with expressions ranging from concern to resignation. Dorothy stood beside Leonard, her hand finding his. Dr. Paulson's voice came through the speakerphone, professional and measured. "I'll start with the health panel. Leonard, you were absolutely correct about the selenium deficiency. His levels were significantly below optimal range. Your supplementation protocol has brought him back into normal range, which explains his improved condition." "That's why he looked so poor initially," Leonard said, looking at Marcus. "Not genetics, health management." "The structural evaluation also confirmed your observations," Dr. Paulson continued. "His bone structure, hip placement, shoulder angles, all exceptional. As he continues to develop with proper nutrition, he should mature into a very well-conformed bull. But that doesn't mean—" Marcus started. "Let me finish," Dr. Paulson interrupted. "The genetic testing is where things become remarkable." Leonard's breath stopped. Dorothy's grip on his hand tightened. "We ran a full DNA profile and compared it against the American Red Angus Association's genetic database, which includes historical markers from foundation bulls dating back to the 1970s. Leonard, your calf carries genetic markers that are extraordinarily rare. Specifically, he expresses traits from Crimson Legacy's bloodline, the exact bull you suspected." The kitchen went completely silent. "How is that possible?" Jennifer whispered. "Recessive genes can remain dormant for multiple generations," Dr. Paulson explained. "Your commercial cow apparently carried Crimson Legacy markers that weren't expressed in her phenotype, but were passed to this calf. Combined with whatever genetics the unregistered sire contributed, this calf has randomly expressed a genetic combination that hasn't been seen in documented Red Angus cattle in over 30 years. "What does that mean for his value?" Marcus asked, his voice barely audible. Dr. Paulson paused, and Leonard could hear papers rustling. "I contacted a specialist in rare bloodline genetics at Iowa State University. Based on this calf's genetic profile, structural quality, and the extreme rarity of these Crimson Legacy markers, his value as breeding stock is estimated between $15,000 and $25,000, possibly more to specific breeding programs seeking to reintroduce these lost bloodlines." Leonard felt tears sting his eyes. Dorothy's hand was shaking in his. "You were right, Leonard," Dr. Paulson said softly. "Completely. Absolutely right. Your 73-year-old eyes saw what everyone else missed. This calf is exceptional." Marcus sat down heavily in a kitchen chair, his face pale. Jennifer covered her mouth with both hands. "I'm sorry, Dad," Marcus said finally, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry we doubted you." The kitchen remained silent after Dr. Paulson's revelation. Leonard stood with Dorothy's hand clasped in his, tears streaming down his weathered face. Not triumph, but profound relief. Marcus spoke first, his voice breaking. "Dad, I'm so sorry. We treated you like you were senile. We questioned everything. Your judgment, your competence, your mind, all because you saw something we couldn't." "You were trying to protect the farm," Leonard said quietly. "I understand that." "No," Jennifer interrupted, standing abruptly. "We were arrogant. We assumed that because you're 73, your experience didn't matter anymore. But Dad, You saw genetic markers in that calf's bone structure that 3 professional buyers missed. You diagnosed a selenium deficiency no one else caught. You were right about everything." She crossed to her father and embraced him tightly. "We made you prove yourself like you were on trial. I'm so sorry." Dr. Paulson's voice came through the speakerphone again. "Leonard, I need to say something professionally. In 15 years of practice, I've learned that farmers with decades of experience often see things diagnostic tools miss. You didn't recognize this calf's value despite your age. You saw it because of 55 years of pattern recognition that technology can't replicate." "What happens now?" Dorothy asked. "I've contacted 2 elite breeding programs already interested in purchasing or contracting breeding rights. Leonard, you have options." After the call ended, Marcus looked at his father with new respect. "We need to talk about the farm's future, not about you stepping back, but about how Jennifer and I can learn from you instead of assuming we know better." "What will you do with the calf?" Jennifer asked. Leonard considered carefully. "I'll breed him for 1 season, establish his offspring quality. His value isn't just his sale price, it's what he can contribute to cattle genetics." Word spread quickly through Iowa's agricultural community. The 73-year-old farmer who'd insisted a common calf was exceptional, who'd been dismissed as crazy, who'd been proven spectacularly right. It became a story shared across farming communities, a reminder that experience built over decades held value technology couldn't replace. One breeding program representative, Dr. Helena Cortez, made a unique proposal. "Mr. Hutchins, you've identified recessive genetic markers we thought were lost. Your ability to recognize subtle confirmation indicators, we need that knowledge preserved. Would you consult for our heritage genetics program?" Leonard looked at his children, who nodded encouragement. "I'd be honored." 3 months later, Leonard stood in the barn with his grandson Tyler, examining the now 8-month-old calf who'd developed beautifully. "See the shoulder blade angle?" Leonard explained. "You can't just look at current appearance. You have to see the structure beneath. Imagine what they'll become." "Grandpa, when everyone said you were wrong, how did you stay sure?" Tyler asked. "Because I've been wrong before, many times. But I've been right enough to trust my judgment. Experience doesn't diminish with age if you keep learning. My eyes see more clearly now than at 30 because they've seen so much more." "I want to learn everything you know," Tyler said seriously. Leonard's chest tightened with emotion. This was legacy, knowledge passing forward, experience honored, wisdom preserved. "I'll teach you everything I can," Leonard promised. "And Tyler, when you're my age, trust your judgment even when everyone questions it, especially then." The following winter arrived in silence, covering the fields of Iowa with a thin layer of snow that made the air smell like memories. I walked through the same barn where it had all begun, the same place where, a year earlier, my family had looked at me with pity. Now the air carried a different weight. The wooden boards seemed to breathe with me, and every sound, the creak of the timbers, the slow breath of the animals, felt like part of an old song I was only now beginning to understand completely. The calf was no longer a calf. He had grown into a bull of striking presence, his body powerful, his gaze calm and steady. I called him Legacy, a name that seemed to contain everything he represented, the past that endured, the future I was allowing to be born. Tyler came every day. At first, he only watched. Now, he was the one tending to the feed, adjusting the nutrition, recording the genetic data of the first calves sired by that once unremarkable bull. Sometimes I stood still, simply watching my grandson repeat gestures I had made for decades, the firm touch along the animal's back, the attentive eye for structure, the patience in every motion. It was as if time had looped back on itself, and I could see my younger self again, learning from my own father beneath this same roof. "He moves just like Red Baron did in the old photos," Tyler said one morning, admiring the bull. "He does," I replied. "But what matters isn't being the same, it's continuing what came before." In the months that followed, Legacy's name began appearing in trade journals. Farmers came from miles away not only to see the bull, but to meet the old man who had believed in him. Yet I no longer spoke about genetics. I spoke about vision, about time, about listening. I said the secret wasn't in recognizing perfection, but in seeing potential when no one else could. In spring, I sat on the bench in front of the barn, the sun warming my face. Dorothy brought me coffee and sat beside me, as she always had. The sound of calves echoed from inside, mingled with Tyler's laughter. "You did it, Leonard," she said. "You proved you can still see what others can't." I smiled, my heart full and steady. "No, Dorothy. I just reminded them that time doesn't erase what the eyes have learned." The wind carried the sweet scent of hay, and for a moment everything seemed suspended, past, present, and future, as if the world itself were breathing with me. I closed my eyes and listened to life go on, calm and certain. Legacy snorted softly in the barn, and I knew that even when my hands grew too tired, what I had built, the eye, the faith, the instinct, would live on in those who learned how to see.